You're listening to Big World Network.
Average, Season 2, Episode 12. Written by Jonathan Thompson, read by Heather Thompson. You probably assumed this already, but just in case, the beast did continue to find me. Actually, I'm pretty sure what he was doing could most correctly be called haunting. Once, while trying to catch the bus, I decided to really test his resolve. Since I had already noticed that he slowed down when I did, I slowed gradually from a sprint to a jog to what I would technically consider a trot. For a second, I thought that the dog was all bark and no bite. Then he bit me. It was sort of a tag, though. His teeth didn't do any lasting physical damage. After a few days of this nonsense, I asked my father, "Do you think it's possible I have a nemesis?" "Well, yeah. All supers have nemesis. Nemesi? Maybe it's nemisodes." Ignoring his assertion, I said, "It's nemesises." "Are you sure? I hate the sound of that. Nemesises." He spat out the word. Terrible. "Yeah, I'm sure. I looked it up." "All right," he said, still not convinced. "But please don't tell me you think that dog is your nemesis." "Why not? It harasses me, and only me," I pleaded my case. "It's also a poodle, and it seems pretty cool, actually. Never gives me any problems." "That's my point. He's a calculating, malicious poodle." "They are one of the smartest breeds," I added. "Okay," Dad smiled and shook his head. "Wait," I said. "So, you have a nemesis?" "Yeah, sure." "How come I've never heard about this? Actually, why don't you ever tell me anything about supering?" "I don't know. I guess I don't like to talk about work." "You tell plumbing stories all the time!" "Well, yeah, but plumbing's more of a hobby." "Seriously?" I asked with such passion that my voice cracked. "You put supering as your job and plumbing as your hobby?" "Supering takes a lot out of you, Quinn. Plus, people don't actually want to hear about superheroes. They don't want to know how often the Earth comes close to blowing up or how many times a week someone threatens to unleash an army of super-intelligent ostriches." "Trust me," he assured me. "It happens a lot. They're sort of the weapon of choice these days." Which makes sense. Crazy things are pretty much dinosaur birds. People don't want to know all this stuff. They want to hear about gross houses and clogged toilets. "But I'm not talking about people," I told him. "I'm talking about me. Why don't you ever tell me that stuff?" He looked at me pensively for a long time, gnawing on his thumbnail. "Because once you find your powers, you're going to take off. You're going to change the world in your own way. In the meantime, though, I want your life here to be a safe place. For both of us." "Can you at least tell me about some of the villains? I mean, who's your nemesis?" "There really aren't that many true villains out there. I know, it surprised me too. For most of them, though, it's just kind of a one-time thing. Not many people are genuinely malicious, just for the fun of it. You get a lot of anti-heroes, though. Plenty of those guys." "Really? So you mostly just deal with thugs?" "Pretty much. And when somebody really goes off the deep end, we can usually just talk it out." "Talk it out?" I asked, disappointed. "Seriously?" "Yep. This one guy, I'd say I have to go see him at least once a month, but he's really not that bad. Just a little moody." You may have noticed that by this point in the conversation, I had asked about his nemesis twice with no response. I noticed this as well. "You keep avoiding the topic of your nemesis," I reminded him. "Yeah, okay. There is somebody, but I haven't seen or heard from him in years. Since before you were born." "What's his name?" My mind swarmed with villainous titles like Wrecking Ball or Destro or some such nonsense. My father's tone darkened and his brow furrowed. Dennis. Really? No alter ego or secret identity? Nope. Just Dennis. Dennis. I repeated, thinking about how I viewed this lack of pseudonym. As mentioned, that's usually a bad sign in the comic world. Those villains usually have names like Lex or Vandal. And to be fair, I wouldn't try to hide my name if it was that awesome. Part of a good villain's name, though, was his last name. For example, Wilson? Not so great. But Wilson Fisk? Fantastic. Dennis what? I asked. What? What's his last name? My father thought deeply and looked pretty uncomfortable doing it. A knock at the door saved him from answering. Sort of. You'll see what I mean in a second. Dad opened the door and gasped. Dennis? Dennis? I repeated and ran to see what was happening at the door. Standing there, grinning broadly, was a huge, muscular man with a remarkably square head. His long hair just touched the shoulders of his worn leather jacket. He was bigger in all dimensions than my father, and this was actually the first time I'd ever perceived my dad as small. Dad was always larger than life, but somehow, standing in front of Dennis, he just seemed little, like a child. For some reason, though, something was familiar about Dennis. I had seen him before. The picture in Vinny's office. Suddenly, with a burst of violence, Dad shouted, "Get out!" and swung his fist at Dennis. But Dennis calmly caught it and squeezed. Pain crossed Ultrarian's face. "Hey, little brother," Dennis said cheerfully.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.